All right, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Monday, May 19th, and what do you want to talk about today?
The fate of the world.
Okay.
I
do
really don't know.
okay, well, do you want to start right now? I just saw the news that Trump is going to be calling Putin. I think he might be
Yeah,
calling him right now. Do you think
right.
that
Well,
this
right.
anything is going to come out of this, or
Um, well, I know that it was originally scheduled for basically right now. I think 10 o'clock
Hmm.
Eastern time, and that was a few minutes ago. I saw some other report that maybe it had been postponed until noon, but it definitely should take place today, very soon, if not already. Um, I, there's a great deal of expectation, especially on the Western side, that this is going to achieve some kind of great breakthrough. I don't really see how, unless Putin really does do an about face. It's just that his negotiating team, Lavrov, Peskov, other high-ranking officials have been so consistent about what they say are their minimum requirements that I don't see how there's going to be. I mean, the only breakthrough would be is if Trump just agreed to them. I would be very, very surprised again if Putin really made any substantive concessions.
so you think that this phone call, nothing's really going to come out of it? It's just
Well,
more theater.
I think that Trump really believes. I think he has a kind of to be honest, a sort of a naive faith in his own charm or his negotiating skills, and he thinks and a naive, understanding of how diplomacy is conducted. It's just sort of like, yeah, you had a problem, some sort of dispute with your neighbor. The thing to do is get together and have a couple of beers, and then, you'll work it out. But of course, this is it's just not the same. I don't think maybe I'm being unfair to Trump, but I kind of get this sense that he doesn't really understand how um, how great the obstacles are that he's facing here. So I really don't think much of anything that will come out of it. One thing, um, it's possible that they'll talk about Iran. I think there is, again, reason to be hopeful, very cautiously hopeful about Iran. That's a deal that could be done. I just don't see that this deal can be done. Again, the sides are too far apart. And so the Russians have the upper hand. I think they're probably preparing a major offensive right now. They're not going to call it off, just to please Trump. I don't see them doing that. I think it's after the offensive is completed and the map is redrawn, then it may be that there will be some sort of awakening on the other side, a recognition that they do have to negotiate. But right now, we're not there yet.
And the first round of negotiations we had in Istanbul, or not, I shouldn't say the first round, the one that just happened recently, you said that there was a rumor going around that the Russian delegation said, if you don't accept these terms now, where we take these 4 oblasts, the next time we talk, it's going to be 5.
Right.
And then I heard some rumors as well that it's actually going to be 8.
Yeah.
So can you substantiate these rumors and tell me what's what?
Yeah. Well, all I can say is that I guess it was a Russian reporter, asked the Russian negotiating team directly about this rumor. And the answer said, no, that's not true. We didn't say 5, we said 8. So that's what the Russian negotiating team apparently said themselves. I haven't heard it confirmed on the Ukrainian side, but, maybe they just, I think it's believable, but I don't know. I can't be sure.
Okay, so has there been any confirmation about that on the Russian side, or we just have that one source, one news reporter?
Yeah. I mean, it's an official Russian news agency and the Russian negotiation team. So that's pretty much an official confirmation. I think there is every reason to believe that is, in fact, what happened.
So how many oblasts are there, do you know, in Ukraine?
I don't know. They're okay, but what would that be? The 4 that we're talking, we know the 4. Of course, that's Kherson, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, and Lugansk. Now, what would the next 4 be? Well, I think it's going to be Odessa and Nikolaev. That's in the south there. I think also probably Kharkov, which they've already taken a good chunk of in the northeast. And then there's Dnipropetrovsk, which they're about to enter right now, directly to their west, to west of where the forces are positioned already. And that would take them all the way to the river. I think those probably are the additional four, that if in fact, the negotiating team said 8, that's probably the 4 that they're referring to. Now, they already do have, some territory in Sumy, but they've declared that's a buffer zone. And I think that's probably a separate issue in their minds at this point. We'll see. That's my best guess.
Well, if Trump has some realization that militarily they can't stop the Russians, and if he has this call with Putin, Putin says, yes, we will take another 4 if you guys don't accept this now, then do you think that could put some real pressure on Trump? Because if he realizes, like, okay, if he continues this, he'll either get drawn further into the war, or he'll be the man that ended up giving away half of Ukraine to Russia.
Yeah. Right. He's in a tough spot. I think, he's made it more difficult for himself by dragging this out and kind of muddying the narrative. He's had Kellogg, really repeating the kind of points that we heard under Biden. And then if he does simply, push for acceptance of the Russian terms, that's going to be a real shock. And there's going to be a lot of, pushback within his administration and within the U.S. in general if he does that. I think that's not going to be accepted, but he could do that. What I would say is that, okay, look, this is or at least you could say, this is what I think we should do. Because, again, if we don't accept these 4, it's going to be a lot worse. It's going to be 8 next for Ukraine. By doing this, okay, this is far from ideal for Ukraine, or from our perspective, but it's far superior to what will happen if we don't accept the deal. And let's just be realistic about it. Now, people will be shrieking and whatever. You say, okay, fine. The Ukrainians will refuse to go along. The Europeans will refuse to go along. I said, okay, you guys don't want to do it. It's your war. I'm going home. And then when it goes to 8, he said, hey, I told you guys, right? I think that's really what he should do. But I maybe he will, but I don't think so. It seems like, he's still, maybe he's slowly learning his lesson because of the tariff war and the war against Yemen and, kind of the humiliating concessions that the U.S. side had to make in both cases. But he still is clinging on to this notion of America as the world hegemon, because he's still, from time to time, and certainly people within his administration say, well, if the Russians don't go along with this, we'll have to punish them. Again, it's just not like we're actually equals, but we're the headmaster and they're the student, and we'll have to give them a flogging. In this case, talking about new sanctions, which this whole thing is so absurd, but that's what's being threatened. That's, if the media reports are to be believed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the whole thing just is strange how we say we will accept, we talk about, will we accept Russia's terms? Like, well, the way that Trump has always framed this is that this is Biden's war. This isn't America's war.
Right.
He's inserting himself into it. Right. This isn't for us to accept, right? This is for Ukraine to accept or not accept.
Yeah.
And us being that sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out backstop is causing problems. Everybody's trying to figure out trying to pull President Trump one way or the other.
Right.
Instead of just stick to your guns, Trump, and say that, yeah, you said this wasn't your war. This is Biden's war. Just extricate yourself.
Right.
But I think he does feel the pull, like you said, if he is in that headmaster type of position. He's like, okay, kids, sit down. We're going to settle this. It's like,
right.
don't insert yourself into the situation. You don't need to be here. Do you think that's the strategy you should be taking, right?
Yeah. The thing is, obviously, he has virtually no leverage with the Russians. That's the reality. But he has huge leverage with the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are so crazy that maybe even if he did declare to them, we're going home, not another bullet for you guys, no more intelligence, there are people there who still try to fight and convince themselves they can do it. And there would be their crazy European backers who would support them in those delusions. So it might go on, but the whole thing is going to collapse pretty quickly if the Americans really do pull out. Yeah, and so, he could do that. He has that leverage. And then maybe there'll be a coup in Ukraine, could make things worse, but it might make things better. And then, maybe we'll have a chance for a real negotiated settlement. Maybe the Europeans will wake up. And if they don't, it's their problem. I think that's just what you have to say. And I say, hey, I told you, you were going to make these concessions. Those were painful, but now it's a lot worse, my friends. You didn't listen to me, right? And it would be hard to argue against that. But if he just he stays in it, then it'll become his loss too. When they go to, they take the 8 oblasts instead of the 4, and it's going to look bad. And then he's going to feel like he's got I can't have a Biden-like kind of, Afghan-like fiasco here. We've got to do what we can. We've got to escalate in some new way or whatever. There's going to be those kind of pressures if he just stays in it. And he'll get a lot of flack if he pulls out now. But I think if, it will be seen in the not so distant future that it was the correct decision if he does it. But it seems with Trump, it's really hard to get him to make a firm decision and stick with it and enforce some kind of discipline within his administration, because it just seems like there's a war going on within his administration, and sometimes it seems like there's a war going on within his own head about it too.
Right. So they're going to slap on new economic sanctions. Russia's not worried about this at all. These threats of economic warfare are just not working against Russia. In terms of military escalations, do those scare the Russians at all anymore? Or after 3 years, they're just they know that maybe they just need the only real risk is triggering a nuclear war. So they need to be careful with that.
Yeah,
but other than that, anything that NATO throws at them, they seem to be able to handle. Do you think they feel comfortable there?
Yeah. Well, first with the economic sanctions, let's say, according to their different counts, there have been 24,311. Some people say 28,000. But, let's say at least 24,000 sanctions already. So this thing is now we're going to slap some real sanctions on them. It's just so silly. I mean, it really is. I don't know, this cartoon kind of appeared in my head thinking about it. It's just like, imagine an army that's holding a city, and the enemy's army is, you can see them out there. It's enormous. They're approaching your city. They're actually taking, fortifications every day, nearby, strengthening their position, taking the high ground. And then you see their armies getting bigger and bigger, and they're, more and more equipment's coming in. And meanwhile, they are pummeling your city right here. And you're losing men, you're losing equipment. You're clearly in a rather desperate situation. And so what do? You don't say, hey, maybe we ought to negotiate some kind of settlement with them. And okay, we'll agree to pull back from this city, but if they let us keep the other cities, hey, that's pretty good. They're actually being kind of generous, because let's just go for it. But no, instead it is, let's deliver an ultimatum to them. We're going to have a ceasefire. Let's tell them. And if they don't do it, we're going to pull out our secret weapon. And what is the secret weapon? It's like the other side's wondering. And they roll out this old cannon, and they say, oh, your economic sanctions weapon. You fired that 17 times already. It seems like, the whole thing is like Alice in Wonderland or something. It's beyond silly, but it's what they're doing.
You're right. It's really true. I mean, it's like they're playing poker, and Russia has a royal flush, and this game of poker, everybody's showing their cards, and Ukraine has just a 7 high or something like this. Whereas, so you just wonder, like, what's the plan? Why are you doing this? The inevitable outcome here. Russia's serious. They will take more. So are you willing to sacrifice all that? Do you think that this is breaking through, that when Zelensky's delegation heard this directly from the Russians, that they have to have some realization that, well, this probably will happen. So maybe we really need to think about this. Or just issue another ultimatum. We're going all in with our 7 high right now. It's
I haven't seen any signs. You hope that it got through to some of them. By the way, there's a report that their interpreter actually defected during the middle of the negotiations. He just ran off to Bulgaria, and then they realized he was gone, and they had to delay the negotiation. That was reported by CNN Turkey, and then also by a Russian, maybe it was TASS, one of those official Russian news agencies. So anyway, that's kind of an embarrassment. But this is what you're seeing. I remember in the old days, the Soviet Union, people would regularly defect, from the Soviet side to the Western side. And it was always an embarrassment to the Soviet Union. And it told you something about like the relative attractiveness of the societies. It wasn't it wasn't a deluge, but there were occasional defections. They happened. They happened every year. But now, if you really are being honest with yourself, you're saying, why are people running away from Ukraine the moment they have an opportunity? Maybe this is like should tell us that this might be a sinking ship, to switch to yet another metaphor here.
So this interpreter, that was a defection, essentially?
Yeah.
Like he's off in Bulgaria?
Well, he went off to, I guess the defection is maybe not the right word. He escaped. He got out of Ukraine. He felt like he could get into Bulgaria. He probably knew somebody there and he would be safe, he figured. So that's apparently what he did. He drove to the Bulgarian border, and that's the last anybody heard of him.
This thing's such a clown show, but this clown show is causing thousands of people to die every week. And it's just going to keep going. Okay. Any other developments that you want to talk about on the Ukraine side, or do you want to move over to something else?
Maybe there's something that's been going on that I haven't mentioned, and that is that the Russians have been taking all the islands in the Dnieper, in the lower reaches of the Dnieper. That this is something they've done over the last few months. So now I think they have every last island. There were even reports that they had established a beachhead on the other side. Now I think those are exaggerated. What they've done apparently is they've established fire control over, the opposite bank, which is the right bank of the river there, where the Ukrainians are. So there's this may be preparatory to, a river crossing. We don't know, but they have made, they have greatly strengthened their positions along and within the river, and even over on the other side by establishing fire control. So that's just interesting. It's anybody's guess. Where we're assuming there's going to be offensive. It just seems like everybody's assuming that at this point. But who knows? And if there is one, where will it be? Could it involve a river crossing? Maybe. That would be very challenging. It would be unlike, what we've seen from Putin so far. I think he's very cautious, but it's not impossible.
Right. Yeah, there's been a lot of talk of this offensive. And then you made an interesting comment earlier, just saying that just with Putin's character, before he makes any type of big action or big move, he will give Ukraine, one last chance. Say, this is the offer on the table. Take it, or things are going to get worse. We saw that before with the initial one, saying like, we can stop here, and then we won't take any more territory. Saw it with Minsk before the SMO. And now we might be seeing the same thing here. Maybe this call with Trump is kind of that thing, saying, hey, President Trump, look, we really don't want to keep doing this. You need to withdraw your support. Let's end this now. We'll hold on to these 4 territories. These are Russian-speaking territories. Referendums were held. These people want to be part of Russia. This makes sense for everybody, and we can just stop it here. But if you don't, then we're going to go on and take some more. And then they're prepping for this. Everything's ready for this offensive. Trump might hear this, and hopefully he gets the message clear from Putin. I think that's got to be what they have to be talking about, right? That's saying like, look, we're clearly in the driver's seat here. I heard that recruitment levels in Russia have just been increasing month after month. How many they're getting a month now? 40,000 volunteers,
like
or something
40
like
or 50,000 or something. That's what was reported. Before it was 30,000 regularly month after month. These are volunteers. Again, they're offered good financial packages. But there are a lot of young men that are willing to sign up for anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. So I think there are 6-month contracts, 12-month contracts, 2-year contracts. Now, I imagine that refers to just combat time, and then all of them are going to have to undergo training, of at least 6 months, probably a year. But we have seen a surge, according to the Russians, in new volunteers. So, that just shows you. And then meanwhile, we continue to get these really disturbing videos of people being grabbed off the streets, beaten up, in Ukraine. This is, it gets virtually zero coverage in the West, but this should be a major news story. It's not actually hidden within Ukraine because everybody knows about it. And recently in the Rada in Ukraine, a member showed a video, of this. One of the videos, that we see. So it's not like, okay, yeah, this is somehow Russian. I don't know how staged by the Russians or anything, no, everybody knows that it happens. And there is growing anger about it within Ukraine, obviously. I think I heard recently that actually, like the Russian military wanted the TCC to prohibit them from wearing Ukrainian military uniforms, because they found, like, when they come back from the front for a leave of whatever reason, they get all these dirty looks because a lot of people think that they're TCC. Again, these are the press gang people, and they don't want to get the same kind of hatred that these TCC people get. So they want to make sure that they have different uniforms. You can put all your hate on them. Yeah, it shows. It's amazing. Again, this is the country that has people that flee the first opportunity that they're given. A country that is having to chase down people in the streets to fight for them. This is the country that the West is supporting.
Yeah, it really amazes me. When Trump got elected, I was naive. I thought, yeah, he says he doesn't like this war. He's the commander in chief. He can just pull out. And the more that I've had these talks with you, I'm just starting to understand that there's so many strong forces beneath that just keep on propelling things forwards towards war. The military industrial complex, the deep state, the neocons, all these things are just, I just didn't understand how powerful it could be. Like, I just thought that Trump could just come in and just say, we're done. No, none of this, we got problems at home. We're just going to focus on this, you guys,
Right.
And it just didn't happen. And
Yeah.
it's still hard for me to believe that it's just so difficult.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I think it was going to be difficult. It was going to be difficult for anybody, even for the person with the most talent, the most, the best political skills in a century, it was going to be a very difficult fight because you have all those forces that are arrayed against, anybody who wants to significantly change policy. It's, and the problem is, Trump is not that person. He does have certain strengths that I think his main strength is just his brashness, his honesty. He just says things that he's not supposed to say, and then that has real power. It can lead to breakthroughs, but he also lacks intellectual discipline and consistency. And, that's, and we're seeing the results. I think there clearly is a part of him that really wants to change, but it's just that he just doesn't really know how to go about it. It was going to be a tough fight for anybody. I just don't think he's up to the fight.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move over to Iran. You mentioned just earlier in this conversation that you think that a deal between Russia and Ukraine, they're just so far apart, it can't happen. But there's a possibility that we could reach some type of agreement with Iran and avoid war with Iran. And I just get really mixed signals when it comes to Iran. I just hear that, okay, Trump does not want this war. We saw him stop the Houthi campaign because it wasn't going well. Surely that's a sign that he knows that we can't handle a war with Iran. But then, I don't know if you saw this just yesterday, Witkoff came out and said something that made me feel like war with Iran is back on the table. I'm going to play the clip because I have it here real quick.
Okay.
We have one very, very clear red line, and that is enrichment. We cannot allow even 1% of an enrichment capability. We've delivered a proposal to the Iranians that we think addresses some of this without disrespecting them. And so that's important. We want to get to a solution here, and we think that we will be able to. But everything begins from our standpoint, John, with a deal that does not include enrichment. We cannot have that because enrichment enables weaponization, and we will not allow a bomb to get here.
So, what do you make of that?
Yeah.
No enrichment, that's a deal breaker for Iran, right?
No, they've made that clear again and again and again. And yeah, I'm confused because we are getting very mixed signals. That's one signal, that so okay, that those comments by Witkoff there tell you that this is not going anywhere. That the Americans are not serious about this. This was all phony from the beginning because everybody knew that the Iranians were not going to accept it. By the way, I noticed there was the banner at the bottom that said, Iran says that it will not give up its right to enrich uranium, and the right is in scare quotes. It shouldn't be in scare quotes. They do have a right, under the nuclear the non-proliferation treaty, to which they are a party. They are a signatory. And they do have that right. It's not something that they and so they're not going to give it up. They have no reason to give it up. To give it up is really a surrender of their sovereignty. And it's just like what Iran is all about in so many ways. Going back to the Islamic Revolution, the establishment of the Islamic Republic at the end of the 1970s, it is about sovereignty. It's just like we are not going to be a vassal of the West. And this would be, a real bending of the knee. They're not going to do it. And I think the Americans know they're not going to do it. So I don't know what Witkoff is saying. I've heard these comments from Witkoff and from others, which suggest, okay, yeah, this isn't going anywhere. The negotiations are just a sham. But then you hear other statements, both from the Iranians and from Trump himself, that suggest otherwise. So I have no idea what's going on. I really don't know what's happening.
So I feel like if you're making statements like this, then a deal isn't possible, and the only other alternative then is what? Is we have either we go to war with Iran, or we look really stupid for reneging on our very firm red line that we just put out there publicly to the world, saying no enrichment at all. Why would you say that so publicly? Go on news to say that when you know Iran can't accept it. Now it's out there. Okay, either you just completely fold and look like a complete idiot in these talks, or you're preparing for war, right? That's the only two things that I can think of that come out of this, right? Is there is there something I'm missing? What do you see?
Well, I think it's something that I've noticed. I hope that I'm reading this right, but during the last couple of weeks, I think ever since the ending of the Houthi war, Trump has stopped talking about bombing Iran. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I missed something. But now he makes these threats. It'll be very bad for Iran. But he talks about economic sanctions. And in fact, they even have imposed new sanctions on them already. But he's talking about not a drop of oil is going to be exported from Iran because we're going to impose these secondary sanctions. And then we also had the news that the B-2 bombers were redeployed from Diego Garcia back to the continental United States. And that suggests, I'm maybe this is all bogus. It's deliberate. It's it's just some sort of psyop or something that they're trying to create give the Iranians a false sense of security. But the messages that I'm seeing now seem to say, that indicate that, again, the military option's off the table and that they want to use the economic sanctions instead to punish Iran. But the thing is, that's just so absurd. For example, if you're going to impose secondary sanctions to stop oil exports, who is the main buyer of Iranian oil?
China?
It is China, right? And you just back down. Are you going to impose 100% sanctions on them again? That doesn't work. You can't. So it just seems like they're a paper tiger in both regards, the military and the economic. In the end, what can the U.S. do? Well, the U.S. can do real damage to Iran. They can kill people. They can destroy some infrastructure inevitably. But that can't happen without serious damage being suffered by the U.S. And I think they know that. Oops, I'm sorry about that.
It's all right.
Okay. Okay, let's see here. I forgot to do this.
Nice ringtone, by the way. Sounds like a Japanese anime.
Really?
I don't know.
I didn't.
Okay, so anyways, you're saying that, you know, these sanctions were a paper tiger economically and militarily. So why are we doing this then? What's the? I mean, because if we place the secondary sanctions on it, clearly China is going to ignore it. You know, they say, well, you're not going to do this to us. You know, we can't. So
right.
what's
We've
the
been
U.S.
through that
going to do?
before. We know you're bluffing, right?
Right.
Or,
So
or if you do that, you know, okay, yeah, we've already shown that we're willing to, you know, to accept your sanctions, but you're going to, you know, it's the problem is on your side. You know, our economy, we can do without you. Yeah, we would rather trade with you. It's better for both of us. But we can do without you. You can't do without us. I think that's, you know, the reality. And that the Americans began to realize that. And that's why they approached the Chinese and they rolled back, you know, all but 10% of those tariffs that were imposed.
Do you think that there's some large collective coordination going on between the, you know, the rest of the world, especially the BRICS countries with Pezeshkian and China, Xi Jinping and Putin and Lula, everybody everybody realizes that, like, okay, the poor United States, they're a little crazy now. They still think they're in the top. Everybody sees the decline. We just have to humor them because he's kind of acting like a crazy guy with a gun, and we just got to be like, okay, you're doing good. We'll play around, humor you, but they're just kind of steering us slowly into the grave. Like, let them play these X sanctions. We know that we're sticking together. We'll be fine. You know, both Russia and Iran have been sanctioned out the wazoo, so I don't think they care. And China has called the bluff on the tariffs. They know their strength vis-a-vis economically. The U.S. has been made even more apparent. So do you think that's what it is? It's almost like the world, they're acting like orderlies with the U.S. as the mental patient. It's like, okay.
Yeah, well, I think there's maybe some truth to that. I mean, I think, you know, again, especially probably Putin really has so far dealt with Trump in a really masterful manner. I mean, that he's, you know, he hasn't given anything, but he's shown a lot of respect. And, you know, some of that is real. Like, hey, Trump is better than Biden. You know, Trump has made some positive moves. Let's not forget about that. We are in a better position today than we were before January 20th. But we can also just see he didn't use this word in reference to Trump, but recently he called the European leaders idiots for their economic sanctions. And you could say by extension, if the Americans do the same thing, they're idiots too. And they have been idiots for what they've done already. And it doesn't work, especially stupid of the Europeans, because the Europeans are actually much more dependent on Russian resources, you know, in particular energy, than the U.S. is. But yeah, sanctions always hurt both sides because economic relations are always about mutual benefit. So when you when you cut off an economic relation, you're hurting both sides, and sometimes you hurt one side more than the other. And it's clear that the European side's being hurt more. So anyway, that's the reason for Putin's rather unusually harsh language. He's generally very, very diplomatic, but I think he was just so exasperated. He just called them idiots. And he's got to be thinking the same thing about the Americans if they're really going to be trying sanctions again. But he knows that that it does not do him any good, you know, to show Trump disrespect. You know, you need to treat him carefully. You need to butter him up when you can, but, you know, without giving him any real concessions. At the same time, being honest. You know, there's, and he has been. It seems like it's not like I think he's given him any reason to believe that they're going to make these concessions. He has been firm. You know, all the reports that we get from Witkoff and from the first conversation say that, no, he didn't concede anything. But he does it in a way. Just if you remember, when the ceasefire proposal was first made, and he turned it down, but he did it in such a diplomatic way that there were a lot of reports that seemed to suggest that he kind of accepted it because he was just so careful in his language. But if you look at it very carefully, no, he did not. He said, yeah, that's a wonderful idea. Great. In principle, we completely support it. And he said, but we need these conditions. And the conditions are actually very, very hard. And he hasn't backed away from that. And, again, that's been repeated again, even in the most recent negotiations. So, certainly when it comes to, the Russians have been, I think, have dealt with Trump in a very effective way. Now, there's always the danger that at some point Trump will just get frustrated and blame it on the Russians. It doesn't seem to be his natural. It's not the way he wants to go. I think he genuinely wants to get along, with the Russians. In that way, he's different from Biden. But again, we've talked about these forces, these people around him. At some point, it may be that they're not able to. I'm not going to call Trump a mental patient, but they.
Yeah, I'm not. But it's
I know you're talking about kind of like in general the whole Western. Yeah,
right.
I think
the deep state, the establishment, Russian hegemony is the mental patient.
Yeah. No, I think. So I only kind of tangentially answered your question there, but I think there is an awareness. It used to be like it was, I think Iran was the one that first saw it. But even within Iran, you had people that kept on pushing, what I've heard, even up to really quite recently, up to October 7th, you could say. There was still, like a powerful minority, a faction that was in favor, that kind of really believed in the West and said, it must be that it's because we have to make these concessions. It's just that we're the ones that are being unreasonable in some ways. And I think you've had that in Russia and in China too. And, but I think all three countries have learned that, no, the West they really are hostile to us, bent on hegemony, and they're kind of crazy, like you're saying. And, we need to proceed on that understanding. But again, these are all I think all three leaders, whether you're talking about Xi Jinping, Putin, or Pezeshkian, they're very rational. They're very careful. They're not going to do anything to unnecessarily provoke the Western side, but they're going to stick to their guns, and they're going to always be open to negotiations, but they're not going to allow these negotiations, to lead to concessions, which, they cannot make.
Right. The West has just been completely shattered on all fronts. The Western hegemony has. I mean, we think about it just in the past 3 years with the Ukraine war militarily and with the Houthis as well. We couldn't stop the Houthis. We've completely emptied our arsenals trying to stop Russia in Ukraine, and it hasn't worked out at all. So just militarily, we've just been very exposed incredibly. I think the Houthis may have even exposed it even more so. Whereas we're seeing the other side, all of a sudden, Russia's weaponry and even the Houthis, and we've got a small demonstration of Chinese military technology. It's like, whoa, this stuff is really good. The U.S., not so much. So militarily, it's been shattered. And then economically, the sanctions haven't worked. We had this giant tariff war to start off the Trump administration. It's backfired magnificently. All of a sudden now Trump has to call Xi Jinping and says, okay, sorry about that. Let's work something out. It's just not working. These sanctions that we place on Russia, now Russia is more powerful economically than before. They're growing at a faster clip than any other Western European country. And then morally, this is probably the most important one. Since October 7th, what Israel has been doing in Gaza has just completely laid bare any idea that somehow the Western world is the moral superpower. It's just completely gone now. All of this, and it's so clear to the rest of the world that the U.S. led order, Western hegemony, is over morally, economically, militarily. But it's happened so quick. I can't even think of a more damning combination that's happened these past 3 years without an outright military defeat of a country. That how quickly the floor has dropped out from Western hegemony. And I think it's happened so quickly that many people, I think, in the Western world, they're just in disbelief. They're in a state of shock. And that helps kind of explain their behavior with European leaders, but also with Trump himself. with the United States, it's just this mantra for every politician: America number one, greatest military in the world, the land of the free. This everybody wants to move here. Moral righteousness and prosperity. But that's gone. But they still are repeating that, and I think Trump, he believes in that still very much, and he wants to see America be respected and feared and admired. But it's not anymore because of what's happened the past 3 years. But I think some countries still understand that the mindset that someone like Trump is still in. And I think we saw that on display when he did his Middle East tour.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think Trump loved it so much, was that they showed him this respect. Like, let's, 100 camels, make it 1,000 camels. Trump will love that.
Mm-hmm.
Give him this plane, American flags, this huge procession. All of a sudden, now there's that old feeling that existed, 10, 20 years ago, of that respect, fear, and admiration for the U.S. But I think that when I was thinking about it, I think that maybe those Middle Eastern countries were just playing a game. They understood that now the U.S. doesn't deserve these things, but just for the sake of, like, using the mental patient analogy, to prevent some type of fit on the global stage, let's humor him. Let's do this. And then, we can kind of gently lay this mental patient down for our permanent rest,
Yeah. Well, maybe that's somewhat overstated, but I think you're probably pretty close to the truth. I'd say, the U.S. is still a very prosperous country. It's the second largest economy in the world in purchasing power parity, right? PPP, and by far, actually, it still has a big military, and we've gone into all of this, but it's just it's just not okay. So it's not like it's nothing. It is an important player, but but you're right. The events of these last few years have, in an extraordinary manner, it's almost like it's been scripted from above. It's just like, okay, it's just like, we're going to have, we're going to kind of tear the veil, rip down the veil and let people see the truth here. And we'll do it through, these incidents, these events. And, I myself am amazed by what we've seen. If you had told me just 3 years ago that the U.S. Navy would not be able to defeat the Houthis, for example, I would say, okay, yeah, that's kind of I wouldn't even call that a dystopian science fiction novel. It almost sounds like bad comedy or something. But we've reached that place, that reality. It's just that, through, event after event, we are seeing that the United States is no longer is a long ways from being that hyperpower, that global hegemon. But it still has the pretenses, it still thinks of itself that way. It's still trying very hard to kind of maintain the pretense. And the rest of the world, I think, many governments were slow in seeing that. Again, it's just sort of like everybody got used to the U.S. being the top dog. There's always a lag between reality and perception. But I think perceptions are catching up with this reality that's been exposed to us all around the world. The one place where it's happening most slowly, where perceptions still haven't caught up with reality, is within the West itself. There's a real resistance to it. But I think there's a sense even within the West that, hey, things aren't right. When I'm sure Europeans look at the clowns that rule over them, and maybe they don't fully realize what's going on, but it's saying, this is, we are not the great power that we once were.
Right. I mean, you even said, just like, the U.S. is still a very wealthy, prosperous country. We have a large GDP. We're number 2 in terms of purchasing power parity. Mm-hmm. But what we've learned is that's not really true, I think. With the idea, first of all, if we're wealthy, why do we have $37 trillion worth of debt? Does that really mean we're a prosperous country if we have that much debt? And then this notion of GDP and PPP, I feel like these numbers are being exposed as just fugazi, just nothingness. Mm-hmm. I mean, if we have a country like Russia with a GDP of 1.5 trillion against the United States, which is 24 trillion GDP, but
Right.
somehow Russia's able to outproduce all of NATO and
Right. Yeah.
the U.S. plus Europe
Right.
in a 4-to-1 ratio. It's like, so what were these numbers? They didn't
Yeah.
mean anything. They were
Right.
just, they tricked you. They made you think that you were more powerful than you are, but that's
Right.
clearly not the whole story.
Yeah. They obviously measure something. I think again the PPP is a much better measure, and that gets you closer to the reality. But I think you're right. I mean, that another thing that it just strikes me that even in PPP terms, the West, vastly out is supposed to be, have a vastly greater economy than Russia does. When you combine Germany and the U.S. and France and all of them together, it's just I can't remember exactly off my top of my head what it was, but it's easily 6-to-1, 10-to-1, something like that. But as you point out, Russia's outproducing them, actually, all of them, including the United States, 4-to-1. You just, when it comes to artillery shells and other munitions, and you just say that, yeah, there's something that's just not right about these statistics. If they were close to true, this just wouldn't be happening. I think that maybe a big part of it is that they've been inflated by the service economy. There has been this over the last few decades, really. We've gone from being largely based on manufacturing to services. And yes, services don't make real things.
Right,
that's
right.
That's the problem. When you get into a war, I don't think your service economy really means very much.
Right. Yeah. The Western economy, it consists of intangibles. People are just trading nothing, and that boosts the GDP numbers. But really, I think what you need to be looking at is the ability to produce tangible products, real things, because that type of manufacturing economic might directly will correlate into military might, especially in the need of a real mobilization in an event of a real war. I mean, that's what, if you studied World War II, the United States, that's what we did. We made a lot of things here, and then we just started churning out planes and tanks and ships at a rate that nobody else could do in the world. And that's really what helped turn the tide and made America so powerful. But now that we know where everything is produced, it's not produced in the United States. It's all produced primarily in Asia, China being the real manufacturing belt of the world. So, and I think China has a shipbuilding capacity, I heard, of 275 to 1 compared to the United States. So that, I think, is that type of metric is what we should be looking at in terms of comparative strengths with the country, is get rid of all the noise in the service sector. Look at manufacturing, production capacity of a country.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you want to go to war with China? Well, for every one ship you build, they're going to build 275. You're not going to win that war.
Right.
And you know that they will be able to scale up if they need to at a much faster rate.
Hey, but you forget, it's like the international center of shipping insurance is in London. We're talking about Lloyd's of London. So yeah, they lead us insurance. You make real money in insurance, but I think you can see, like, okay, you're depriving us of the insurance. We don't have to go back to the drawing board and try to build up an industry to replace that. We'll just find another insurance company, and maybe It won't be quite as good. Maybe we'll find out it's actually better for the price. We were just sort of tricked by your reputation into going to you. I think that's actually something that's happened. It's like the Russians discovered they had been fooled by, European brands. Oh, the European cheese, European everything has to be better. I'm sure in some cases it is, but a lot of times it really isn't. It's just, again, perceptions fail to catch up with reality. Their perceptions always lag. And this was
that's very true. I think, those service type of industries, they can easily be replicated.
Yeah.
But people latch onto the brand name, the one that they think is safe and has a reputation.
Right. It's just like in McDonald's pulled out of Russia, and now so the Russians just basically took it over, renamed it, and made changes. And nobody's complaining there. It's just every bit as good as McDonald's was, which, again, McDonald's is often better overseas than it is within the U.S. It was, it really is a pretty good chain restaurant within Russia, but it's now called Vkusnaya Tochka. And it's now run by Russians. They get all the profit, and nobody's really longing for the return to McDonald's. You say, yeah, what we have is just as good. We can replace these these things, but that was all part of that, those economic statistics that made the West look so powerful. I guess what we're finding out is that a lot of that is illusory. It's just easily replaceable.
Right. Yeah, the whole thing is just so insane. The whole house of cards is collapsing. At least for me, I'm seeing it collapse, and I think many people that listen to the show, they follow this type of topic. They can see it as well. But most people in America, I think they still don't understand, don't realize it, and I feel like a crazy person when I meet somebody and they're like, "Hey, how's it going, man?" I'm like, "Oh, it's all falling apart," like so. When will we see some real? I mean, we are seeing changes. I know we are. It's gradual. The veil's slowly being lifted from some people, but I don't know what I just want. I guess I'm waiting for some type of moment. Like, will there be a war? Will there be a financial, economic collapse? Are we just going to see this slow, long death where we're playing it out and expecting something to just drop out the bottom at some point? Like, how is this working?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, we're going to see both. I can't remember who made this comment, but it's become just sort of just a saying. It's just that things change slowly until they change real fast.
And then all at once.
Yeah. And and well, some things have already changed real fast, but as far as the economy and the day-to-day lives of Americans, you're not seeing it yet. I mean, we were seeing, signs. Inflation is bad, and it's bound to get worse, because even though these tariffs were rolled back, they weren't rolled back all the way. And now we're talking about 30% tariffs. That is a considerable price hike, and people are going to notice it when they go to Walmart. And all kinds of consumer items are going to be significantly more expensive at the end of this year than they were at the beginning, unless they're unless the Trump administration agrees to actually cancel that 30%. But if they hang on to it, we're going to see something. And then, there's a debt. There's obvious, serious imbalances within the economy that just aren't sustainable. And all the geopolitical changes are making them less sustainable, because again, it's confidence in the U.S. dollar and the U.S., which is built based on confidence in the U.S. as being the world leader, the safe haven. Whatever happens, the U.S. will always be there and it'll always be number one. This is an idea that people have had, including investors, for decades and decades, and I think that's really suffered a blow because of of these geopolitical matters that we've been discussing, that it's changed, and you see it. There is money flowing out of the U.S. And into gold and into other currencies. It's happening, as we speak. But again, that's relatively slow. But there may be a point where it becomes very fast. I'm not going to predict when that's going to happen.
I won't ask you. Right. Okay. Well, let's finish up by talking about Gaza a little bit. So what's the situation now? There's a large offensive that Israel is engaging in right now. They're sending in the IDF into northern Gaza. There's also talk about aid coming into Gaza. What's happening? Are you able to make?
Yeah, it's hard to know. There's no question that a ground offensive began a day or two ago. They had been bombing Gaza, and that bombing was intensified again in these last couple of days. So whereas maybe typically killing 50 civilians a day, it's gone up to 150 or even higher, close to 200. So similar to what we saw during the first few days after when the ceasefire was first broken by Israel. The violence has increased, and there is talk about some sort of U.S. organized or implemented humanitarian relief in southern Gaza. And I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. I think there are some in the Israeli government that are in favor of that, but there are, the true extremists like Smotrich and Smotrich and Ben Gvir, they're opposed to that, opposed to even giving them a loaf of bread. They want us, to continue the starvation policy. Now, from what I understand is even if this goes ahead and there is some sort of U.S. NGO or maybe a U.S. Army run distribution effort in southern Gaza, it's going to fall far short of what's needed. It will help to save some lives. It will slow down the starvation, but it's not going to stop it. Again, the agency that is really best positioned, that has the experience, has the that really has the capacity to do this is UNRWA. It is the United Nations agency that had been doing it in the past, but the Israelis have really turned on the UN in general. We know that they've actually been targeting UN personnel and killing them and destroying their facilities, and they just want UNRWA out of there entirely, and then to bring in their friends, the Americans, who maybe can help them with the ethnic cleansing. And I think that's basically the idea. We'll have it in this certain area within southern Gaza, so we can just push them out of northern Gaza. We can crowd them into a small part of southern Gaza. And then in preparation for, pushing them out, there are rumors that maybe 1 million Palestinians could be sent to Libya. I don't know if there's anything to that, but there's obviously some kind of effort to find a country that could receive the Palestinians.
Do you think that will happen? The state of Libya right now, I know it's been chaotic ever since Gaddafi, but would Libya allow 1 million Palestinians in?
Well, again, I don't think I haven't been following events there very closely, but I believe that there's a state of civil war. It's not that there is one government in control of all the territory. There is a government that controls part of the territory and is supported by the West, and the West has essentially offered them billions of dollars. I think billions of dollars that they had frozen, as the West often does. We will release these to you, if you take on these Palestinians. And I don't know. I don't know. One thing, I'll make a comment that I hope is not taken the wrong way. But a lot of people say this is a horrible thing, the idea that, we could relocate the Palestinians. And I agree, this is just ethnic cleansing. This is wrong. This is their land. They should be able to live there in peace. And so I support them. But if you think this is horrible, the idea of relocating, you should also be doing whatever you can, if you're a government, to stop the genocide. Because it's just sort of, what am I trying to say? It's just that if you say that, okay, I'm opposed to the relocation, but I'm not opposed to the genocide, then in a way you're in favor of genocide. You're not letting them go, but you're going to let the Israelis kill them all, starve them to death. And that's what you see, like the policy of many governments, both within the region and in the West. It's like, they've condemned outright this idea of relocation. Okay, yeah, but you haven't actually condemned the genocide, and you continue to support it. So what are you actually in favor of? This would be a true crime if you relocated, but it would be better than killing them all.
Right. Yeah. I know. There's just, people. I think the problem is so many people are getting so emotionally invested in this. They want people to fight Israel, but at the suffering of a population that's 50% children. Like this isn't okay. They're all dying. It's just crazy that it's come to this, that we can't have any changes within our government. We are completely enabling this. The United States is sending all these bombs every day to Israel to enact this genocide. We clearly have leverage. We could tell them to open up the gates right away. I mean, we released that dual citizen IDF soldier Eden Alexander, and from my understanding, what I hear is that the agreement that Witkoff made was that he promised that, okay, you let him go, and then we're going to let aid into Gaza, or we'll push for a ceasefire, something like this. There's supposed to be something out of it, but clearly we broke it immediately. Nothing has changed. And I'm seeing more and more people. I just saw this morning on X that there's a lot of people holding up signs saying, I support a military intervention to stop the Gaza genocide. You know, that people are at this point, they want somebody to come in and fight. And but I agree totally. Like, I just don't want to see any more children starving to death. I don't want to see children being blown apart. It needs to stop. And it's just so crazy that they're trapped. It's literally shooting fish in a barrel. This is what it is. You don't let these people out. Don't let them go. Don't give them any food. So if they do relocate, they survive. What would happen? Would the war wouldn't stop, right? Like, if they do, first of all, I don't even know if it's possible. How would you move out 1 million people? And then who would be remaining? Like, would there just be Hamas fighters that stay behind and you removed everybody else that voluntarily was there? And then they say, okay, we're going to, you know, even if they do that, I don't think it would be that easy for the IDF. They've struggled taking territory in Gaza already. They kill a ton of civilians, but Hamas is still there. And from my understanding, Hamas has actually grown in strength, which is not surprising. If you killed my whole family, massacred my kids, well, guess what, buddy? I'm going to be spending the rest of my life, you know, trying to get back at you for that. You know, that is a very strong motivator for for Hamas. So yeah, what do you think would happen if they moved out, if they agreed and, you know, save these kids, get them out? All right, let's do that. And then what happens?
Yeah, well, I think then that it's hard to say that the Israelis would remove all restraints, because I think they've done that already. You would just see a continuation of the war. And, you know, in the end, let's be honest, you know, I in so many ways admire Hamas. You know, they've shown tremendous courage and skill. You know, they're just greatly outmatched in terms of firepower. And yet they have made this very, very difficult for the Israelis. So I admire them. I admire their struggle, you know, and but I don't see how they can win. It's just that, you know, it's just a tiny sliver of land. You know, you can look at that map in the back, and it's already smaller than that. The Israelis have already taken control of something, you know, at least half of Gaza. It was already very small to begin with. And, you know, even with the tunnels, eventually the Israelis, you know, could have control over have Gaza entirely encircled. They will, if nothing else, just starve them out at some point. You know, if they can't kill them, you know, with guns and bombs, they can just kill them through starvation. And I don't see how you can, unless the world intervenes in some way. That's what's going to happen. It's just not a fair fight. And you know, it's the only thing that we can hope for. But it's just we pointed to certain awakening, you know, within mainstream media, but we got a long ways to go. It's just I'm afraid it may be too little, too late.
Do you think the world will intervene?
It has to be the U.S. I don't think. Well, the other possibility again is, you know, Egypt or Turkey, but these are countries run by really very corrupt governments that are going to do whatever they can to avoid getting, you know, entangled in a war there. But yeah, I can see a revolution happening in those countries. I mean, I don't see it happening in Turkey. I think there's a potential, at least, that it could happen, a coup in Egypt. Egypt is a very poor country, but there's 100 million people, and a lot of them are very, very angry, you know, deeply upset about what's going on. The greatest hope, again, is just that there could be a change of policy in the U.S., but you know, I don't see it. The only kind of black swan event that could potentially take place would be Trump could really turn on Israel, but I'm not going to put any hope in that. I'm just not. I think it would be a mistake. It's not impossible, but there's just no reason to really hope that that's going to happen. Again, the friction, I think, between Trump and Netanyahu is for real, but it's still a long ways from spilling over to a real, you know, break in the U.S.-Israel relationship. That still seems very, very unlikely.
Are you surprised that we've let it go this far, get this long? Does it amaze you that this is happening and where everybody's letting it happen?
Well, I guess at this point, I've just gotten used to it. But I think you're right. If we went, if we just kind of turned the tapes back to before October 7th and he said, well, if these things happened, I would say, oh, well, clearly, maybe not the US government, but at least these European governments would come down hard, impose economic sanctions on Israel, at least that. And yeah, the degree to which, these governments are still making excuses for Israel, still complicit, still supporting them, it does surprise me. It is shocking. It really is.
Yeah, when I step back and take a look at it, it is mind blowing that this is happening. It's continuing to happen. That for 20 months we've been bombing a civilian population, a captive civilian population, with 50% of the population being children. We've been seeing footage of children being blown apart for over a year and a half now. And now we have this deliberate starvation campaign that is being inflicted upon these people. And the whole world is upset about it. All the people are upset, but nobody's doing anything. And it really surprises me. It really makes me lose some faith in humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And you just think about how we are, especially if you look at the United States, how we've always been going on these crusades over the past 30 years, intervening around the world as this force of righteousness and morality. And we got to insert ourselves into every conflict militarily, economically, politically, soft power, whatever we do, we're always fiddling in. We're doing it because we're the moral power, the world's policemen. We're going to do the right thing. And then you have an actual genocide that's being broadcast, that's been going on. We're getting, we're going to hit 2 years before you know it of this going on. And in an actual starvation campaign where you see emaciated children, people dying, kids having seizures because they don't have nourishment, just some of the most horrific things that you can imagine being shown to the whole world. And not only are we not doing anything about it, we are part of it. And that is just so crazy. It's so damning. I think not only has Israel destroyed itself from this heinous act, so has the whole Western world. And I think this has been the most damning thing for Western hegemony, Western power. And I think so many people, even within the West, are saying, well, maybe it's time. Western hegemony was terrible. If this is our moral hill right here, maybe we don't deserve to be a hegemon at all. And I hope more and more people are coming to that recognition.
Well, I think more and more are. I think there's no question about it. Yeah, I think you put it very well. I really don't have anything to add to what you just said.
Okay, well, I guess we can end it there. It's just this. It's just hard to believe. It's just really hard for me to believe that this is happening, and the world is just watching it. It's really crazy. Yeah, I think it's a moral reckoning, and I think you put it very well the other day that a lot of people know that there is something deeply wrong with what's happening. It's hard to confront it, but it's being put in their face so much that people are, and they're trying to justify the death of these children, the starvation. It's not something that I think most people can do. So hopefully we can see a change in the hearts and minds of political leaders, or they get voted out of office. We'll see. Okay, once again, thoughts and prayers to the people of Gaza. Hope this nightmare ends for them.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dad.
Okay, thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.